A homeless boy sat down beside a furious, untamable bull, and the beast bowed its head in silence. What happens next will leave you speechless. The first sound was the heavy slam of iron gates, followed by the violent scrape of chains dragged across wet cobblestones. Stormbreaker burst into the square, driven forward by 3 men who leaned all their weight into the ropes straining against the beast's neck. His hooves struck the ground like hammers, sending water splashing into the air from the puddles left by the morning rain. The townsmen surrounding the pen shouted orders, their voices tight with fear, their hands clumsy as they struggled to keep control. The bull's nostrils flared wide, mist rising with every breath in the cold air. His eyes, dark and rimmed with red, scanned the crowd with a fury that silenced even the loudest voices. Children were pulled back by their fathers, market stalls abandoned mid-sale, and doors slammed shut as faces disappeared behind wooden shutters. Stormbreaker jerked suddenly, tossing one of the men to the ground, his body rolling dangerously close to the creature's horns. Gasps filled the square. The man scrambled to safety, but the message was clear. No one here truly had power over the beast. "Kill it now, Branth," someone shouted from the crowd, his voice sharp with panic, "before it tears one of us apart." Branth, the bull's aging owner, stood rigidly near the gate. His gray beard dripped with rain, his worn coat hanging heavy on his thin frame. Yet his back was straight, his expression fierce as he shook his head. "Stormbreaker is mine," he declared, his voice louder than the downpour. "He is no monster. He is worth more than all your herds combined." The men jeered at him, anger mounting. "Worthless if he's killing handlers," one growled. "He'll gut the next man who steps inside." The debate grew louder, voices overlapping, until the square became a storm of arguments. No one noticed Jalen at first. The boy had been sitting against the corner of the stone fountain, knees drawn to his chest, a half-eaten crust of bread clenched tightly in his hand. He was used to being invisible, his presence tolerated only because no one thought him worth the trouble of chasing away. His tangled hair clung to his forehead, and his thin body shivered against the chill. But as the crowd pressed toward the pen, curiosity pulled him from his corner. Jalen rose slowly, his bare feet slipping on the wet stone. His stomach twisted with hunger, but it was not food that drew him closer. It was the bull's sound. Each snort shook the air, low and powerful, almost like a drumbeat that echoed inside his chest. He drifted forward through the spaces between men, unnoticed until he stood near the bars themselves. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "The beggar boy," someone sneered. "Keep him back." But Jalen barely heard them. His wide eyes were fixed on Stormbreaker. The bull swung its head toward him, water dripping from the sharp curve of its horns. The chains rattled as it stomped, and several men cried out, pulling back. Jalen's body locked with fear, every instinct screaming at him to run. His hand trembled as he clutched at the tattered cloak wrapped around his shoulders, hiding the small token beneath, a shard of bone tied with frayed string, the only thing left from the father he barely remembered. It dug sharply against his palm, but he didn't let go. "Boy, get away from there," Branth barked, stepping forward. His eyes, weathered by years of storms and loss, softened for a moment as he recognized the scrawny figure. Yet he did not move fast enough. The bull's massive head swung down, locking eyes with Jalen. The square froze. Women gasped. Men raised their spears, ready to strike if the beast lunged. The boy's thin chest rose and fell, his breath quick, his lips pressed tight. He did not run. He could not. His legs felt carved from stone. Stormbreaker let out a sound that was not a roar but a long, low exhale. His head dropped lower, muscles loosening, nostrils flaring against the damp earth. The crowd gasped louder this time, but in disbelief, not terror. The beast, the same one who had gored 2 men only hours earlier, was bowing. Jalen blinked, unsure if his eyes betrayed him. The bull's breath misted against his face, warm in the cold rain. For a moment, it was as if the world had shrunk to nothing but him and Stormbreaker, their silent exchange invisible to the men screaming around them. "By the gods," Branth whispered, his voice trembling for the first time that day. "No," another man muttered in fear. "It's a trick. The boy's cursed." The tension twisted tighter. Spears wavered in the men's hands, caught between striking and lowering. Jalen swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the rain. The bull's eyes stared deep into his, and something flickered there. Pain, not rage. The boy's lips parted before he realized he was speaking. "You're not angry," Jalen whispered, though no one else could hear him. His voice cracked, thin and raw. "You're hurt." Stormbreaker shifted his weight, lowering further until his horns nearly touched the mud. His massive sides heaved, every breath shaking through Jalen's bones. The boy sank to the ground slowly, mirroring the bull, his knees pressing into the wet earth. His cloak slipped, and the token of bone peeked into view for the briefest second. The chain handlers stared in silence, their mouths agape. None of them dared step closer. The moment stretched long, every drop of rain ringing against the cobblestones like a drumbeat of suspense. A child and a beast, locked in a silence that defied all reason, all fear, all cruelty. What no one saw was the boy's trembling hand, hidden under his tattered cloak, clutching a shard of bone tied with string, a small token from his father, a man the town claimed had once tamed wild beasts before vanishing without a trace. Jalen didn't know if the charm held power, but the bull's stillness made him believe it might. The silence felt fragile, as though the whole town stood on the edge of something none of them understood. The sound of the crowd rose like thunder, echoing off the stone walls of Hollowford Square. Men shoved each other for a better view, women whispered sharply, and children clung to their father's legs, their eyes wide with both fear and fascination. The bull had bowed to the beggar boy, and the miracle spread through the town faster than fire through dry hay. Some called it divine, others cursed it as sorcery, but none could deny what they had seen with their own eyes. Branth stood at the front, his hand raised for silence. Rain dripped from his beard, but his voice carried clearly. "The beast lives because he is worth more than your fears. And this boy will prove it." A wave of protest erupted instantly. "Madness!" one man shouted, his face twisted in outrage. "You'd put that child in with the monster?" Branth's sharp gaze cut through the voices. His eyes were not wild with foolishness, but cold and calculating, as though he saw beyond what the crowd could grasp. "Stormbreaker yielded to him," he said firmly. "Not to whips, not to chains, not to fire. Only to him. If there is a way to save this animal, it is through the boy." The words struck deep. Fear battled curiosity in the hearts of the townsmen, but the image of the bull's bowed head gnawed at their certainty. Slowly the shouts faltered. Some muttered prayers. Others spat in disgust but held their tongues. And with a signal, Branth ordered the gates to be opened. The iron hinges groaned as the chains rattled loose. The smell of damp earth and blood filled the air as the pen opened, revealing Stormbreaker's massive form. The beast shifted, his sides trembling, his horns glistening with rain. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation, breaths held tight. Jalen's heart pounded so loudly he was certain the men around him could hear it. His legs felt weak, each step heavier than the last. Barefoot, he moved toward the pen, the cold mud squishing between his toes. When he reached the threshold, he froze, staring at the open gate. Beyond it was death, or something else he could not yet name. "Go on, boy," Branth urged, his voice low but steady. "The beast waits for you." Jalen swallowed hard, his lips trembling. "If he kills me," he began, but his voice faded. "Then it proves nothing could have saved him," Branth replied. The words were cruel in their truth, but they left Jalen no escape. With trembling breath, the boy stepped inside. Stormbreaker's head swung sharply toward him, the chains clinking with the movement. A deep rumble rolled from the bull's chest, and the ground seemed to shiver beneath Jalen's feet. The boy's knees buckled, but he forced himself forward, each step small and careful. The crowd hissed with unease, some raising their hands as though ready to shield themselves if the beast charged. The bull stamped once, mud spraying across the pen. Jalen froze. Stormbreaker's nostrils flared, hot mist rising into the cold air. But then, as the boy stood trembling, the bull lowered its head once more. Slowly, deliberately, the creature dipped until its massive horns gleamed against the wet earth, almost as though bowing again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Men cursed under their breath. Jalen edged closer, his breath shallow. It was then he noticed what no one else had dared to see before. The bull's body was scarred and bleeding. Iron hooks had torn through its hide, leaving fresh wounds. Red welts traced the path of whips, and dried blood crusted along its flanks. The beast's fury had not been madness, it had been suffering. Jalen's lips parted and he whispered softly, words too low for the men at the fence. "You're not evil, they just hurt you." His voice shook, but his tone was gentle, almost like a lullaby. Stormbreaker's ear twitched, and the bull stilled. Jalen crouched carefully, lowering himself to the beast's eye level. His thin hands trembled, but he stretched one forward, just barely brushing the creature's scarred neck. The skin was hot beneath his touch, trembling with tension, yet the bull did not strike. Instead, its great chest rose and fell with a calmer rhythm, as if listening. The crowd erupted again, but this time their awe shifted to fear. "It's not natural," one muttered. The boys cursed. "He's bewitched it," another growled, his voice carrying sharp suspicion. "Mark my words, Branth, this isn't the work of the gods, but trickery." Branth's jaw tightened, though his eyes never left the boy and beast. He saw possibility where the others saw danger. Trickery or miracle, the result is the same. The bull lives. But in the shadows of the crowd stood another man whose eyes narrowed not with fear, but with greed. Hadrick, a rival rancher, leaned against the post with arms folded across his chest. His frame was broad, his beard trimmed sharp, and his smile thin and cold. To him, the miracle was not salvation. It was profit. If the boy could tame Stormbreaker, then the boy himself was worth more than gold. Whoever controlled the child controlled the bull, and whoever controlled the bull controlled Hollowford's lands, for no beast commanded more fear or respect. That night, as the crowd dispersed reluctantly, Jalen remained in the pen. Men shouted warnings, telling him he was a fool, but the boy ignored them. He sat against Stormbreaker's massive side, the bull's warmth shielding him from the bitter air. The scent of blood still lingered, but so did the comfort of something living beside him. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Jalen did not feel completely alone. Sleep crept over him in fragments, each dream stitched with whispers. In the haze of slumber he heard a voice, deep and calm, threading through the silence. It was his father's voice, or the memory of it. Creatures and men alike bend not to strength, but to silence. The words clung to him even as he drifted deeper into rest, curled against the wounded beast. At dawn, the sun rose pale over Hollowford. Men returned to the square, expecting carnage, expecting to find the boy crushed beneath hooves. Instead, they found Jalen standing tall, his hand resting against Stormbreaker's neck. The bull was calm, its eyes steady, as though no fury had ever burned within it. The sight unsettled more than it reassured. Awe turned to unease, unease to whispers. Some muttered about curses, others about fate. Branth stood proud, though his eyes flickered with something darker. He knew Hollowford was not finished with the boy or the beast, and indeed, shadows were already moving. Hadrick had not slept. Even before dawn, he had sent men to prepare. His plan was simple: seize the bull, destroy Branth, and claim the boy as his own pawn. In his mind, it was not faith or miracle at play, it was opportunity, and he would take it, whatever the cost. Jalen, still unaware of the schemes unfolding, stood in the light of the morning with Stormbreaker beside him. He felt stronger than before, though he did not yet understand why. His hand brushed the small shard of bone tied with string beneath his cloak, and he wondered, just for a moment, if the stories about his father had been true. Yet beneath the peace, shadows stirred. Hadrick had already sent his men to seize the bull, planning to drive Branth into ruin and use Jalen as a pawn. Jalen had no idea he was at the center of a storm larger than any he had faced, and the token of bone around his neck would soon be tested for what it truly was: a blessing or a curse. The attack came at dusk. The first sound was the clatter of boots against cobblestones, a hurried rhythm that grew louder with each second. Before Jalen even opened his eyes, he felt the shift in the air, the sudden tension, the storm before a blow. Torches flared against the night, their flames crackling as shadows danced across the wooden walls of the pen. Then came the crash of chains, the groan of splintering wood, and the angry bellow of the bull. Hadrick's men swarmed into the pen like a tide of iron. They carried spears tipped with barbed points, nets weighted with stones, and clubs wrapped in leather straps. Their voices rang out in harsh commands as they closed in on the animal. "Take it alive if you can," one barked, though the desperation in his voice betrayed how little he believed it possible. Branth staggered into the fray, his thin frame pushing against men twice his size. "Stop this madness!" he roared, his voice breaking with age and fury. "You'll bring ruin to us all!" A spear butt slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling into the mud. He gasped for breath, clutching at his ribs as the men ignored him. Jalen awoke to chaos. He blinked against the torchlight, heart racing as the shouts filled his ears. Stormbreaker's massive body surged beside him, the bull thrashing against hooks and ropes. Men shouted in triumph when they managed to snag the beast's flanks, but each pull only enraged him further. The pen shook with his fury. Jalen scrambled to his feet, mud clinging to his legs. Panic tightened his chest, but then he realized something astonishing. In the wild frenzy, Stormbreaker's horns never struck him. Whenever Jalen stumbled too close, the bull shifted, placing its massive bulk between him and the weapons. The beast's movements were not random, they were deliberate. "Hold it down!" a soldier screamed, wrapping a net around one horn. Another jabbed his spear at the bull's side, only to be thrown aside when Stormbreaker swung its head violently. The man's cry split the night as he landed hard against the fence. The crowd had gathered quickly outside the pen, drawn by the noise. Their faces glowed in the firelight, fear and awe warring in their expressions. Some shouted for the bull to be killed, others stood frozen, unable to look away. Jalen's breath came in short, sharp bursts. He wanted to run, but his father's words whispered through his mind like a rope pulling him upright. Creatures and men alike bend not to strength, but to silence. He clenched his fists and stepped toward Stormbreaker. The bull's eye flicked toward him, burning with pain and fury. Jalen lifted his hand, pressing it against the scarred neck. "Do not fear them," he shouted, his voice cracking but louder than he thought possible. The men froze in disbelief. Stormbreaker froze too. The bull's thrashing stilled, its chest heaving. The rope strained against its massive body, but it no longer pulled against them. Instead, the beast's rage seemed tempered, as though Jalen's words had poured water over fire. For a heartbeat, boy and beast stood as one. Gasps spread through the crowd. Whispers rippled like wind through leaves. "He commands it," someone muttered, fear trembling in his tone. But Hadrick's face twisted with fury. From his vantage point at the edge of the square, he snarled, "Seize the boy!" Two men dropped their nets and lunged for Jalen. He barely had time to cry out before rough hands gripped his arms, dragging him through the mud. Stormbreaker bellowed, the sound so deep it rattled the ground and surged against his chains. Blood streamed down his shoulders as hooks tore deeper into his flesh, yet still he strained, desperate to reach the boy. "Hold the bull!" another man shouted, voice breaking in fear. Stormbreaker's horns slammed against the fence, splintering the wood. Men scrambled to keep him contained, ropes cutting into their palms. But the beast's eyes never left Jalen, who struggled helplessly as he was dragged toward Hadrick. The rancher's face was hard as stone, his eyes glinting with cold triumph. "The boy is the key," he said, his voice low but sharp. "With him, the beast obeys." But before his command could take root, Stormbreaker did something no one expected. With a low rumble that shook the pen, the bull sank down. Its massive legs folded beneath it, its chest pressed to the earth, and then it lowered its head fully to the ground. Chains clattered against the mud as the creature knelt, surrendering completely. Silence fell over Hollowford. Even the torches seemed to flicker less brightly. The crowd stared, mouths open, unable to speak. The symbol of Hollowford's untamed power had yielded, not to whips, not to spears, not even to Branth's authority, but to a homeless boy. Men who had mocked Jalen now stared at him with a mixture of fear and wonder. They saw not a beggar, but something strange, something they could not name. Branth, still on the ground, whispered hoarsely, "It bows to him, only to him." But Hadrick's pride burned hotter than reason. His face darkened as he snatched a spear from one of his men. "Then if I cannot control it," he growled, raising the weapon high, "I will destroy it." The crowd gasped as the spear tip gleamed in the torchlight, aimed straight at Stormbreaker's throat. The bull did not move, its head still pressed against the earth in surrender. Jalen's heart lurched. He tore free from the men holding him, stumbling forward with all the strength left in his body. His voice ripped from his throat, raw and desperate. "No!" He hurled himself in front of the beast, his thin frame shielding its massive head. The spear descended with deadly force. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Many turned away, certain the boy would be skewered alongside the beast. But the sound that followed was not of flesh torn, but of wood snapping. The spearhead struck the small bone charm that hung from Jalen's neck. Instead of breaking him, the weapon shattered, the shaft splitting into fragments that fell uselessly into the mud. A faint glow pulsed from the charm, a light so subtle it might have been imagined, yet strong enough to freeze every man in his tracks. Hadrick staggered back, his eyes wide, his face drained of color. What trick is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with fear he could not disguise. The crowd murmured, their voices thick with awe and dread. The token, once dismissed as a beggar's trinket, now seemed alive, a thing of power. Jalen touched it with trembling fingers, feeling the warmth that radiated through the bone. His mind raced with questions, but one truth pressed against him heavier than the rest. This was no superstition. This was fate. And fate, Jalen realized, was not done with him yet. The council chamber was silent when Branth laid the cracked leather ledger upon the long oak table. Dust lifted from its spine as though the book itself had been buried in shame for too many years. Every man present leaned closer, their faces lit only by the pale glow of torches sputtering in the damp air. The pages were filled with numbers, seals, and marks of approval that did not belong to Hadrick, yet bore his signature. "This," Branth said, his voice low but sharp as steel drawn from its scabbard, "is the truth you all refuse to see." His hand pressed down on the parchment with the weight of final judgment. "Here lie the bribes, the stolen coin, the land taken from widows and children. Here lies the cruelty that fed his table while your son starved." The men of Hollowford stirred uneasily. For years they had bowed to Hadrick, believing his lies, fearing his wrath. Now, stripped by ink and proof, he looked less a lord and more a broken figure in a cloak that no longer gave him power. His face flushed red, his jaw trembling with rage, yet his eyes darted like a trapped animal. "You think these scraps condemn me?" Hadrick hissed, rising to his feet. "You think the boy and the bull speak truth against years of rule?" But no one moved to defend him. Even his closest allies kept their eyes fixed on the table, unwilling to meet his glare. Branth did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You are finished. The lands you claimed are seized. The titles you stole are stripped. Hollowford will not kneel to your cruelty again." Hadrick's protest fell silent. He saw it, the shift in their eyes, the silent verdict. He had been lord, master, and terror, but in that moment he was only a man exposed. Jalen stood at the edge of the chamber, Stormbreaker's shadow looming just beyond the doorway. He should have felt triumphant, vindicated even, but instead he felt only the weight of a hollow victory. His hands curled into fists at his sides as the murmurs rose around him. "A hero," someone whispered. "The boy who tamed the beast. He saved us." The words stung more than they comforted. He turned away from them, his eyes fixed on the bull that had carried him through chains and fury. Stormbreaker's massive head shifted slightly, as though sensing Jalen's unrest. When the session ended, men crowded around him, eager to place him at their tables, to raise his name in the feast halls. They wanted to wash away their shame by calling him savior. But Jalen's jaw was set, his voice steady when he finally spoke. "I do not want your feasts," he said, his tone sharper than any blade. "I do not want a seat at your tables. You cast me aside when silence was easier than truth. I will not be your ornament now." The words cut through the chamber like cold wind. Some lowered their eyes in shame, others clenched their teeth, unwilling to admit their guilt aloud. Branth approached him quietly, his face softer than the sternness he had shown Hadrick. "Then take another path," he urged. "Come with me. My home will be yours. You have spirit, boy, and the world will need it. Let me give you safety." For a moment, Jalen was tempted. He had never been offered safety before, not in Hollowford, not in the world beyond. But then his hand brushed the bone token hidden beneath his tunic, and the memory of his father's voice, faint and haunting, stirred inside him. His eyes darkened with resolve. "Safety is not what I seek," Jalen answered. His voice was low, yet each syllable carried conviction. "There is something greater I must find." Branth studied him, understanding more than he let on. With a slow nod, he stepped back. "Then may the path guide you true." That night, the townspeople gathered in the square, torches flickering as they tried once more to honor him, to call him their own. Jalen stood before them, the bull behind him like a living mountain. The crowd expected gratitude, perhaps even a pledge to protect them. Instead, Jalen's eyes moved over their faces, men who had feared him, scorned him, hunted him. His voice broke the silence, calm and cutting. "You feared what you could not control, but sometimes the strongest power is silence." The words settled over Hollowford like falling snow. No one cheered. No one spoke. The truth was too heavy for applause. By dawn, Jalen was gone. The gates stood open, the hills stretching wide before him. Stormbreaker followed at his side, hooves striking the earth with steady rhythm. He did not look back. Weeks passed, and whispers began to spread among travelers. They spoke of a boy and a bull who wandered the wilds. Some claimed they had seen them by river crossings, where bandits fled at the sight of the beast's horns. Others told of quiet villages where the boy sat in stillness, and the bull bowed in peace as if blessing the ground itself. But when threatened, the beast became fury incarnate, a storm no chain could restrain. Hollowford, once blind to him, now carried his story as legend. Around fires and in taverns, men spoke of him not with laughter, but with reverence. Yet the deepest truth belonged to Jalen alone. On the night he had left, beneath the stars, he had sat with the bone charm clutched in his hand. The bull slept soundly beside him, its breath deep and steady, but Jalen's heart raced. He pressed the token close, his eyes closing. And then, faint as wind moving through stone, a voice came. "Jalen." His breath caught, his chest tightening. It was a man's voice, firm, familiar, alive. His father. The boy who had once been nameless and homeless now carried more than legend. He carried a companion, a shield, and perhaps even a guide. And beyond that, he carried destiny. Somewhere in the distance, both man and bull would bow again, not in surrender, but in promise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, unexpected connections, and the profound bonds that can form between those who are often overlooked by society. This narrative aims to highlight that true understanding transcends language and that compassion can be found in the most unlikely of places.